Hello again, and thanks for staying with us. So there are concerns that South Africa is well on its way to becoming a murder hotspot. This follows mass shootings across the country in recent weeks. Let's get you a sense of what else we know about the trends that we're seeing in the past couple of weeks. Dr. Johan Burger joins us via our video link. He's an independent crime and policing consultant with us from the capital this morning. Dr. Burger, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks as always for making time to speak to us. And in fact, you write about this very issue where you say that we are in the beginning phases of being a mass murder capital as a country. But you say the good news is that we're not there yet.
Yes, well, that is indeed the good news. But the worrying thing is that if this trend continues and becomes worse, as I expect it will, then certainly we run the risk of becoming the murder capital of the world in terms of mass murders. So yes, that's the unfortunate truth.
Is it worth going through several definitions before we unpack what underpins this? I mean, for one, at which stage do we consider the killing of several people a mass murder versus just that, several people being killed in one instance?
Yeah, well, the police work with a definition of three or more people being killed by either a single person or a group of attackers. So that's more or less the definition, three or more people killed during one incident by either one or more people or attackers.
Yeah, and I imagine there are several factors that contribute to why we might be seeing an uptick in these kinds of killings. I mean, we're showing visuals, for instance, of what looks like remote areas in the country. I wonder to what extent geographical location feeds into where we're likely to see these trends, or are you finding in your own research that it's more a proliferation of this kind of crime throughout the country?
Yes, it's a very complex situation, and it's very often quite different from place to place, or from area to area, because there seems to be a range of reasons or motives for carrying out these attacks. And then very often what you find is revenge attacks, retribution attacks, and so the one attack leads to another attack. In the past we've often seen some of the more familiar attacks, never on the scale of what we now see, but in the taxi industry, for example, between rival gangs, especially in the Western Cape and so on. We've seen attacks carried out for political reasons, and the most prominent of these attacks was the Shoba Shabani, the Christmas shooting in 1995, where 19 people were killed and many more were wounded. So now we see increasingly a competition, a violent competition, in short, a violent competition for business. So you would see this especially in the mining industry, the Zamazamas, for example. There still may be political motives to some of these attacks. And then you see the construction mafia also engaged in violent attacks on either opposing groups or on legitimate groups that they want to force in accepting their business. So, the illegal drug trade, there's so many illegal businesses happening where there's a competition between the various groups, organized criminal groups, syndicates, and so on involved.
And in the midst of that, we've reported extensively around just how dysfunctional crime intelligence has been in this country. I imagine that's not where we're likely to find our solution, at least if nothing is done to fix some of those inefficiencies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ayanda. I think, crime intelligence has been in a mess for many, many years, almost 2 decades now, since Richard Ndluli's time, and we all know the history there. And they are still struggling along. There are pockets of excellence from time to time. We see successes, but as a division within the police service, they seem to be struggling and not yet able to produce the kind of intelligence that we require for the purposes of proper law enforcement. But it's more than just crime intelligence. The police itself has been struggling along. We know that it's experienced reduced numbers over the last decade. They've lost 15,000 police officers, and there are many other problems within the police service. But the whole criminal justice system as an entity no longer provides the kind of deterrent to criminal groups. They simply don't fear that they will be brought to justice. And so on. And I mean, this just motivates them more and encourages them to continue with these kinds of attacks. And to the extent that the criminal justice system experiences these inefficiencies and lack of capacity, that will probably, cause or create more space for these criminal groups to carry on with these kinds of attacks.
Yeah, most of these attacks are carried out using guns. I mean, you've just spoken about police and their role in this, and whether it's the assassination of Charles Kinnear in the Western Cape, conversations around illegal mining and why we're struggling so much to bring that under control, drug syndicates in many parts of this country. There's often a golden thread that runs through them around the extent to which police are actually involved in those crimes. To what extent do you reckon that is actually complicating our ability to respond to this? In other words, those who are meant to be curbing the crimes in some instances are part of it.
Yes, on the one hand, of course, there's the involvement of some police officers in criminal activity, but and that in itself is a debate in itself. We've often called, while I was with the Institute of Security Studies still, we called for a complete reform of the police service, and that remains the position. So that's another discussion. The availability of firearms also is a problem. Illegal firearms, of course. I'm not judging those entitled to arm themselves for legal purposes. But the availability of firearms to a large extent changed the face of crime in South Africa. And, earlier days when groups were in conflict, they used knives, they used other sharp objects of various kinds. But firearms makes it so much easier. You can kill people at a distance. You don't have to be close. Unfortunately, very often, innocent bystanders, are killed in the process, but these criminals, have no concern for them.
Yeah. Some people might be interested to find out what else underpins what we're seeing in our country. For instance, in the U.S., a lot of the mass shootings that are carried out there have typically an ideological undertone to it. It's someone, for instance, believing that a certain ethnic group or population should not exist. To what extent does that characterize some of the mass shootings we see in this country? Or are you finding that it's more just a scramble for resources?
Yeah, I haven't seen, the ideological motive, much, to the extent that some of these attacks were carried out for ideological reasons. I haven't seen much of that so far. I think the majority of these attacks are carried out for illegal business purposes, in whatever form that manifests. In some cases we've seen political motivation as well, but what concerns me more is the fact that, by and large, the huge increase that we are currently seeing is within the illegal business environment, and I think that is the thing that drives the mass shootings more than anything else at the moment. Yeah.
Task teams in the past have been established, and I suppose as we look to solutions, there's going to be questions asked around whether we need more specialized task teams and some of these tactical response units, or is it about better equipping the ones that exist to be able to respond to these trends?
Yeah, again, Ayanda, the police have in the past achieved various levels of success, but it's the best form of investigation at this time that, if you have a new crime trend that is posing a big enough threat that the police would then pull together some of their best detectives, members of other units, crime intelligence, tactical teams, and they've been fairly successful so far. The problem with that is that when you involve or include a detective with, in a task team, they often have to remain in that task team for months and longer. And during that time, the other, and some of them very important case dockets, investigations that they have to work with and that they are working on, are then left behind. It gathers dust while they focus on the more important crimes. So, so it's a double-edged sword that the police are working with. To the credit of the police, I must add that when these construction mafia groups started with their kinds of activities, their attacks, the police immediately realized this is a developing problem, and they appointed priority teams within the operational structures across the country, and they've involved business in these operational teams in these priority teams. So it shows that the police are paying attention to these things that are happening, but it's more than just the police. The police are understaffed, under-resourced. We all know that. The President acknowledged that on the 8th of January in his speech. But we also need the other government parties to become involved, and then business more generally, because the growing levels of unemployment and poverty are certainly creating the space for these types of crimes to continue and to grow.
You certainly get a sense that you're going to need a multi-pronged approach if you're going to meaningfully try and solve this issue. It's an incredibly important story. Thanks very much indeed for coming on to help us understand it a bit better. Dr. Johan Burger is an independent crime and policing consultant.